You're listening to the Tales of Leadership podcast. This podcast is for leaders at any phase on their leadership journey to become a more purposeful and accountable leader, what I like to call a pal. Join me on our journey together towards transformational leadership. Welcome back to Tales of Leadership. I am your host, Josh McMillian. I'm an active duty Army officer with over 16 years of leadership experience and on a mission to create better leaders, what I like to call a purposeful, accountable leader. And my vision is to positively affect 1 million lives in the next 10 years by sharing transformational stories and skills. On today's episode, I'm going to be interviewing Payne Schoen. He works for the Maxwell Leadership Company. He is also an entrepreneur and the founder of the Payne Schoen Consulting. He is a leadership coach. He is a transformational leader. He's what I like to call a purposeful, accountable leader. And as always, make sure you stay to the end, and I'm going to provide you the top 3 takeaways you should have from Payne. Let's go ahead and bring him on. Payne, welcome to the Tales of Leadership podcast. Thank you so much, especially over the holidays. And so to give you just a quick backstory, I've tried to film 4 of these this week because I'm off work where I'm in the Army, and you're one of 2 so far that's actually stayed with it. So thank you.
You're
How are you
welcome.
doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Joshua, for just making the time and asking, and more importantly, thank you for your service. Very grateful for you and all the other men and women who serve our great country. So thank you for being just excited to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate it, brother. Yeah, it's always an opportunity when I get to talk to leadership, especially someone who works kind of in the Maxwell Leadership Company, because those core values are very kind of close to my heart. But I'd love just to start off is take the time to, describe who you are to our listeners.
Who am I? That's always a fun question to answer. First thing that comes to mind, a follower of Christ, a husband, a father, um, and a relationship builder, I think would be the way I would define myself. I love meeting new people. I love hearing people's stories. I love having conversations. It's funny, I was just listening to Simon Sinek here recently, and I'm a guy who struggles a little bit with ADHD. And so he was talking about how he doesn't do a whole lot of reading. And I try to read. I read a lot. I don't retain as much as I wish I could. And he made a good point. And it's really resonated with me. He said, I don't do a ton of reading, but how I learn and how I grow is through conversation. And so that's why I'm really excited to have a conversation with you and learn from you. And hopefully your leader or your listeners will get a little bit out of our conversation today.
So you just said something that it took me a really long time to discover, like my natural strength. So I was kind of diagnosed with the dyslexia, and because of that, I've always shied away from reading and thinking that I couldn't kind of retain that. But I learned quickly, kind of just experience, like jumping into a new position in a way of asking powerful questions, listening, and then just doing. And that's how you learn. And so it's funny, you and I share the same thing, kind of like ADHD and dyslexia merged into one for me. And reading was always something that I challenged with, but I always just jumped into whatever I was
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. And, my story, very similar, uh, very experiential leadership development for me early on, playing
Yeah.
sports, growing up in that space, always wanting to be a captain, probably not for the right reasons, but then figuring out what it took to be a captain and then doing the
Mm.
things that built the influence, built the respect, built the trust, and ultimately being able to do that. So totally resonate with that.
So that's a beautiful kind of example. You said influence, like the key word. Like one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and I've never got an opportunity to ask anyone that kind of works within the Maxwell company of, defining leadership in your terms. And I know we're all kind of followers of John Maxwell of like influence, but I was wondering maybe if you could take the time, what does leadership mean to you? And could you go a little bit deeper in kind of like influences in terms of leadership?
Yeah, when I think of influence, because that's the prototypical Maxwell definition of leadership. Leadership is influence, right? Well, what does influence mean? To me, influence means the ability to get an individual and a group of individuals together and all moving in the same direction. And so influence
I love
is
that.
being able to get people guided down a direction, in your world, a mission, in my world, a project or a task or a goal. And so if you can get people together and moving in the same direction, not doing the same things, but moving in the same direction to achieve that common goal, that to me is influence.
Yeah, I love that. And I think kind of walking side by side with people in terms of being a shepherd. And as you do that, you naturally build influence. The first time that I started reading John Maxwell's books, to me, it never really struck what he was trying to define kind of influence in terms of the term. Because whenever I hear, at least in the military, influence is kind of like a negative term in
Mm,
a way. Like I would always identify it as being almost like manipulative. And then when I started really reading these books, and then I started diving into like the Army's definition of, it's literally, it starts off, I think, in ADP 6-22, which the Army has regulations and doctrine for
yep.
everything, but it talks about influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and
Mm.
motivation. And then I looked at the Marine Corps, and then I looked at John Maxwell, and that's really where I was like, man, he's on to something. That's beautiful. But I've never had the time to actually drill down and to define what influence is, at least what it means to you. Because I always ask people, hey, define leadership in your terms. But I think influence is one of those words that you could just really peel back.
Yeah, you talked about manipulation, and there's a fine line between
Yeah.
manipulation and influence, leadership and manipulation. And a lot of the guys that I follow, my mentors say, you can manipulate people with the strategies,
Yeah.
the skill development, but it comes down to those core values and your intent, right? And I love what you said: purpose, vision, and direction. That's what people want, and that's what people need. And you know, I'm not sure we're landing, and I don't think it's intentional, but I just don't think we're always connecting those dots in the purpose, vision, and direction.
Yes, beautiful, brother. So I'd love to kind of start this off with having you walk me through your leadership journey. Where did that start for you?
Yeah, so I'd go back to sports. Growing up, played sports. I was the middle child of three boys, prototypical middle child
Yeah.
characteristics. And I had an older brother, awesome, incredible athlete. He was an all-American athlete, and I was not. And from a very early age, I saw how his athletic ability gave him popularity or influence. People liked him,
Mm,
and he didn't even have to try. And my greatest fear is one of them is rejection and being taken advantage of. And so I just love connecting with people, getting to know people. And so very quickly from an early age, I connected my athletic ability to my ability to influence and lead, and specifically tied a lot of my worth up into being good in sports and ultimately beating my brother. And it's funny how that has um, developed and manifested over the years, because I was never going to be able to beat him. He was an All-American and I was not. And so that journey and that struggle and what happened through that, but we can come back to that. But really, that's where it all started, and it was. I'm not sure if the intentions were as good as I wish they might have been. Or looking back, you always wish, oh, I was a leader, I wanted to just influence people from day one and just do my thing. But it was, I wanted to be good at sports to beat my brother. And so, but being a part of
I
sports
love
and
that.
being a part of team sports, I played football. It's funny, I played football and golf. So golf, yes, a team sport, but not really. And so football was my main sport, and just being a part of 11 people, and have the opportunity to play at the college level, and go to the next level, and learn and meet new people, and being exposed to things that I had never been exposed to, getting to know those people, learning how to build trust, earn respect, discipline, taking action. And so that's really where a lot of the leadership ability was developed. You talked about taking action. That's how I learned. I just tried trial and error. I think I was given the gift. One of my strengths is developing relationships, so I was able to develop
Mm,
relationships, and that helped in the leadership journey. And it was interesting when I left college football, I stepped out into the public accounting world, and that's a we can talk about that story. It was a very different world, going from high level athletics to a very defined, systematic, um, individual, non-collaborative environment. And I was a fish
mm,
out of water, and everything that I had learned to that point didn't translate very well, and it was a whole different type of person that I was working with that was the opposite of me. They were, again, I'm stereotyping, generalizing, but most of them were individual workers, tend to
yeah.
be reserved, not as outgoing, didn't care about collaboration, could come in, do their job, go home, and have no conversations all day, and be totally fine with that. And that wasn't something that I was used to. So kind of a big pivot there, and a learning opportunity for me. But that's kind of where it developed.
Yeah. So I would love to kind of go back to you not having the athletic ability, but going and playing college football, man. Like that's no small thing, right? Like you did it from the root of wanting to compete with your brother, and I can resonate with that so deeply because I joined the military in a way I it's kind of subconsciously to compete with my
Mm,
sister. So when I was in she was in high school, she was the cadet battalion commander in charge of ROTC. She had influence, be able to command rooms of like 100 of her peers, and I always wanted that. Like I wanted to be able to do that almost from like a selfish gain in a
mm,
way, and that's what started me down the path of being in the military. But once I got in there, I really started to discover what my unique strengths were, what my why was, what's my purpose on this earth, like being able to go a lot
mm.
deeper other than just those artificial layers at the top. So maybe walk me through that when you started competing with your brother, but when you kind of found yourself.
Yeah, I'm a slow learner. I'll be the first to admit it, and I'll also admit my mother would back this up. I have to learn everything the hard way, and so you can tell me,
Oh,
don't touch
you
that
and I
stove
both.
because you're going to get burned, and I'm going to touch it, and then I'm going to touch it again just to see, what was that a fluke? And on a bad day, I might even touch it 3 times. But yes, but I had a knack. So we talked about ADHD. I had ADHD,
Yeah.
and I truly believe football was kind of the release to it. Took medicine as a
Mm,
kid, got off of it in high school, and it's interesting. I think the physical exertion for football was huge, and so that helped. Um, the reckless abandonment, the jumping in the deep end, going back to learning everything the hard way. That football was inclined to do that versus a basketball. So my brother was a All American football player and basketball player. Ended up playing college basketball. Basketball I wasn't as good at because when I got frustrated, I couldn't take it out on somebody else. And
yeah.
so I had some alignment there, but you're absolutely right. I did it out of desire to beat my brother, and then my dad also set the incentive: if we get a college scholarship, he'd buy us a car, and if he didn't have to pay for college. So I had two incentives, and so I learned from an early age, when you incentivize me, it's successful. But I used that as kind of the reason, and I didn't do the self-discovery, self-reflection work that I needed to define my purpose and understand. And it's interesting as you pose it. I think I'm having even more clarity as we're just talking through this, that after college, I went into accounting based on some recommendation. My dad recommended me to do it.
Yeah.
So I did everything but that. I had 5 majors in college. And I ended up blowing my knee out the summer before my junior year. So I had a redshirt year, thinking about law school at the time. And so my advisor said, don't get a 4-year degree in 4.5 or 5 years and think you're going to go to an elite law school. It just doesn't happen. So I had two choices: accounting or a biochemistry. Wasn't going science, so I was good at accounting. But I went in there. I started doing these classes, and had I paused for a second and said, "Payne, look around this room. Something doesn't fit. You are like a fish out of
Mm,
water. You want to do teamwork, group projects. You want to collaborate and discuss things. Everyone else in these classes want to come here, take the notes, do the work, and go. They could not say a word. I'm like, again, don't know what it was. It's probably just an overexposure of a lot of things. Football was what I needed for the relational and teamwork thing, so I just missed it. So I go into accounting because of a recommendation, graduated '09, heart of the recession, wasn't a ton of jobs, very fortunate. Accounting, I think I graduated small liberal arts college. I think there were 300 of us. 8 of us on graduation had jobs, 5 were accountants. Very fortunate,
mm,
huge, great foundation for my job. But again, I was using other people's measures of me. What do they think that I was supposed to get done? And I was just trying to be everything to everyone. And I went through a journey. I spent 5 years in public accounting. I describe it as the longest decade of my professional life because of the experiences. Then I went to a startup company and measured success based on what my two partners measured. I still hadn't done this self work. And it wasn't until
mm,
joining the Maxwell team, really out of response to I'd left the startup world at that point. I was working in a law firm, helping build out their operational department. Um, and one of the initiatives was leadership development and people development, and that's how I found Maxwell. Got into it, started doing the work myself, and that was the first time I did real work in the leadership space that was more research and learning. I had read a lot of books, I had done all of those things, but it's kind of like a check the box deal. Whereas now it was like, what does this mean through my lenses? And
yeah.
so I'll land the plane here and you can ask the next question. But what ends up happening is I get into the leadership development. I really find a sweet spot. Like I knew as I did more
Mm,
and more of that was my calling. And it's funny, I can go back to in hindsight, you can always see kind of the journey. Like I said, I'm a man of faith. I know not everyone is, but just I believe how God's hand navigates, or whoever the higher power, whatever you get, whatever your listeners believe in, whatever the higher power navigates, you can see the navigation, right? And I can remember going back to being a senior in high school. There was a movie called Coach Carter. Are you familiar with it?
oh yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
Samuel L.
Yeah.
Jackson, the basketball coach, and there's this troubled kid on this basketball team. Gets kicked off the team. He wants to come back, and he's good at heart. He's just rough around the edges. And the team, it's a inner city California school. They're really good at basketball. Samuel L. Jackson, alumni, comes in, steps in as a coach, and sets some pretty tight requirements on education. You guys get C's or better, or you don't play. First semester, they're going along. Everybody's telling them they're getting good grades, and they're winning a ton of basketball games. Grades come out, and half the team's failing. And so he shuts down the team and forces them to go to the library. Long story short, they open the gym back up against Samuel L. Jackson's wishes, and he quits as the coach. Walking
Mm,
in the basketball gym to pick up his stuff, and all of the athletes had moved their desks from the library to the basketball floor and basically bought into what he was saying. And there's this one kid, the troubled kid, that stands up and quotes a poem by Marianne Williamson. She calls it "A Return to Love." On there, it's the deepest fear, and it goes, "Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. For it's the light, not the darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be successful, talented, beautiful, whatever it is? And the real question is, who are you not to be? You're playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightening about shrinking so others won't feel insecure around you. You were born to shine like children do. It's not in some of us, it's in all of us." And I was rocked to the core when I first heard this. Like so much to the point I
mm,
memorized it. I don't know why I memorized, but at 18 years old, I memorized it. And it's this last quote: "As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. And as we are overcome our fears, our presence liberates others so that they can overcome theirs. And I didn't know why it hit me at 18. Fast forward to 34, and then that's when I realized it. I was in the Maxwell leadership. I realized my light is to help other people. When I shine it, when I'm who I am, when I'm actually my authentic self and not trying to be something somebody else wants me to be, I put off energy that just connects with people and allows them to elevate. And so that's where it all came full circle. I started figuring out, all right, there's this calling, there's something moving inside of me. I need to do this. And then once I said it out loud, God just started opening the doors.
Yeah, that is so powerful. I think kind of unpacking that is that's the true meaning of fulfillment. And my definition of fulfillment is having perspective in your life, being able to aim for the stars, but have a path that you want to go on. If you aim small, you'll miss small, right? And then having a passion, and then having a purpose in life. And then when you can connect all three of those, that's when your spark
Mm,
happens. That's where powerful movement can happen. And that's what achieves fulfillment. And it sounds like when you started the Maxwell company working there, you took all your previous strengths, going through high school, wanting to compete with your brother, maturing those strengths, maturing them in college, especially in football, understanding you're good at building teams, you're good at being on a team, you're good at leading, you're good at building relationships, and that translates to your
yeah,
purpose, which brings light into
yeah,
this world, and that's being a coach. And you and I had almost the same kind of spark moment. Mine was, through the Army, being what they call an observer coach trainer at Fort Polk, Louisiana. But it's so beautiful is that I don't think that it's a coincidence that a lot of people that I talk to have similar life journeys, because in my mind you have to take the time to think. And what does John always say is that our thoughts shape our beliefs, our beliefs define our actions, and our actions define our legacy. But it all starts up
mm,
here, and we have to spend the
yeah,
time to like truly think. And then if we can't do that, then our actions aren't going to be aligned with what we should be doing and then what we could be doing. And there was a beautiful Proverbs, I think Proverbs 16:9. I was looking it up. The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his
mm,
steps. And I see that as in leadership. For me, it's a metaphysical journey. Everyone's always focused on goals, but goals in my mind is an hedonic treadmill. All right, you tackled a goal, you got that number of clients that you want, or you took down this big obstacle, but what's next? There's no end state. And part of being a leader is being able to see through that, seeing through the mental fog, and being able to define kind of a clear left and right limit, but knowing that that bridge that you're walking on isn't a linear line. There's branches along those way, but they'll always come back to where you should
yep.
be, and then you'll branch back off and it comes back to where you should be. So that's beautiful, and I really wanted to make sure that I said in that. And there was another thing that you said that I absolutely loved. Had 5 different degrees, and one of which was a STEM. So okay, no, I'm not even joking, man. So the Army, I was supposed to go get an MBA at the Naval Postgraduate School. The day I show up, we go do orientation. They bring us in this room, and they're like, "Hey, congratulations, you guys are accepted into the Army's first cohort for the Masters of Science in Systems Engineering Management." And I raise my hand, and I'm like, I think I'm in the wrong room. I'm supposed to be getting an MBA. He's like, no, the Army literally just changed it. Congratulations. It's like, oh my God. Because I had a criminal justice bachelor's degree. I avoided math like the plague, not because I couldn't do it, just because I just didn't want to
Who
do it
wants to,
right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I spent like $4,000 in tuition just to try to learn through it. But I was able to finally get there. But one of the most powerful things that I've learned, and that I think really helped define your spark in the military, when we're doing these missions, they have a concept that's kind of called SEALs. So whenever you go do a new military operation, you always want to orient yourself to your operational environment. So you go in there, you take a knee, you take off your hat, you take off your gloves, you take off your eye pro, your ear pro, all that, and you just allow the environment to surround you. You hear it, you can smell it, you can sense it, you can taste it, and you just peace and quiet, almost like meditation. It's the order before the chaos, and then you're truly oriented into your new environment, and that's the pausing and thinking, and then you go take decisive
Mm.
action. So there's so much stuff in there that I wanted to unpack that
I
was
love that. Can
beautiful.
I ask you a question? You said
Yeah, go.
something there. You said, it all start. You use John's. I gotta go back. You use John's analogy as thinking defines our beliefs, beliefs defines our actions, actions define our sex. In your experience, do people naturally default to thinking?
I don't think so. And here's a kind of an example of that is in the military, they always talk about, hey, what's your leadership philosophy? What's your leadership
Mhm.
philosophy? And the last two positions that I had was a company commander. I was in charge of 131 soldiers as a rifle company commander. And then I was a HAC company commander where I was in charge of 250 people. The next job was a battalion commander. In that position, they never take the time. The Army never takes the time to have you truly stop and think about what your leadership philosophy is going to be. What kind of leader do you want to be? What kind of core values? Because they give you their core
Yep.
values. They give you the Army's core values, which in truth is very similar to my own core values. But I don't think people, and I don't think the environment that we set up for people allow deliberate thinking until now. The Army has a new program. It's called the Army Coaching Program. And it was a 3-month program of where I went through an International Coaching Federation accredited program, and they force you to define what J.R. Flatter, kind of the dude who set it up, the house of leadership is. So what is your house of leadership? A house of leadership is a metaphorical leadership philosophy, but it's a literal house. It's something that you can see. It's something that you can walk in. There's a foundation that it's built upon. And when he challenged me with that, that's really what started me down this path. So no, I don't think, to answer your question in a short, concise manner, that we do a good enough job of setting the conditions for our team members, the subordinate leaders that we work for, to set up their house of
Yeah.
leadership.
I love that question. When we first talked a couple months ago, you told me about that. And I've been thinking about it since, the leadership philosophy. And I don't know if I've ever defined, and I've kind of been working through that since you challenged me with it consciously and unconsciously. But that's my experience is we don't teach people to think, and I think I'm not going to rag on the education industry because I think I mean, they do so much, but we teach people how to learn to attest, but not to
Mm,
problem solve. And so I loved
yeah.
what you just said, is orienting to your surroundings. And when you first land some, I'm just thinking about, like, that is so important. Like, pause for 5 seconds to calibrate. I went on like a trip, like, thinking, you go on a trip and you leave, Illinois, where I live, where it's snowing today, and I fly down to Houston.
Uh,
It's a whole different world. And I'm like,
yeah.
most of the time I'm running to the Uber, and so you're so moving so fast, and we just keep doing that we get in our own way. And so I'm always fascinated to hear people's perspective. Can I ask you one more other question? I know this isn't an interview, but I'm really fascinated with
Oh
this.
yeah.
So you talked about core values, and actually, the Army gives you their core values and kind of probably instills them in you. When did you
Mhm.
develop and identify your core values?
My core values were, I would say, always something that I've had instinctually. There's a quote that I love, and it's by Aristotle: "We are what we
Mm.
repetitively do. Excellence then isn't an act; it's a habit." That is, so I remember memorized that ever since I started in the Army, because when I seen that, it became sticky to me in a way. It just stuck with me. And if you ever get a professional email from me from work, it's always the tag underneath my email, and it kind of boils down to what my core values are. I call it RAD. So RID RAD. I'm all about acronyms. RID is or RAD is routine, accountability, and discipline. I think what I am at the base of who I am as a leader is I'm routine in my actions. I'm accountable to myself and others, and I hold people accountable to what they said they're going to do. And then I'm disciplined. I'm disciplined because I have a big enough why. I have an alignment between my head and my heart, and I'm going to put my hands to it and I'm going to see it. And then the red piece is respect, integrity, and duty. So respect, understanding that anyone on my team is always going to have a voice. I don't care where you came from. I don't care what your rank is. I don't care what your position is, because some of the best ideas and some of the most complex times that I've ever had has came from people who were never given an opportunity or a voice. I think integrity goes back to that part of do what you say you're going to do. I had a battalion commander, and I strung it all together. To answer your question, no, I didn't learn it until recently. I was 35, but I pulled all these things together, and I realized that, okay, how do I make decisions in very dynamic, chaotic environments? What I like to call the rule of true north? What keeps me on azimuth when I'm in a very hostile environment? And it's, respect for others, having a voice, doing what I said I'm going to do, and duty, understanding that I'm just part of something much bigger than myself. I should not be selfish. I should not have an agenda. And I think kind of through that too, I had a lot of humbling moments, if that makes sense. And when I started to define my core values, I kind of created an acronym, because I'm an acronym junkie, right? And I call it I would just call it value. So I think how to do that, because a lot of times when you hear a podcast too, we always talk about, hey, this is how I discovered it. But for me, I kind of broke it down into steps. So the first way to truly discover your core values is, number one, is you have to visualize your past. So what in your past is created a burning desire in your present, and then why, kind of digging into that, and then analyze the leaders around you, past, present, that you've had. What has worked for them? Why did you like them? Why did you despise them? That's all goodness, because that is where your head and your heart is truly aligned. And then learning what your red lines are as a leader. So integrity for me, if you lie, if you cheat, if you steal, that is a red line. And I don't care who you are, I will kick you off of my team, because you violated a moral compass, a moral contract with me, that I can't have you on my team. And then the U is understanding your work history. So the Army, for example, has the leadership acronym, and all those core values completely resonate with me. And if you're working for an organization like Maxwell, what are the core values in Maxwell? I'm guarantee you, Payne, you share a lot of those. And the final one is just putting it all together, and then making it traceable. Because if you can make it traceable, then you can start to discover what your core values were. But at least that's how I did it. To answer a really long question, I'm sorry.
No, I love that. And so I totally resonate with what you said, in the sense of they're always there. And that's why it's it's crazy to me when I because values is where I start too, because they're the driver, right? They're that foundation. For me, you go back to House of Leadership, it all starts there, because
Yeah.
everything builds from your values. And we don't have to have the same values. There has to be some congruence, and we have to
Mm.
talk about the differences and understand each other, why that's a core value for you, why it's not a core value for me. But I was in London working with a couple of European sales teams earlier this year, and we were taking them through a values exercise. And I love the framework you just put. I'm probably going to steal that from you. I'll give you credit the first time. But just understanding how you create them that make them really you. And I think that was maybe some of the framework that I was missing. But we're taking them through. You got a cards. They start looking through it, and it was crazy. There was a guy in the back that was sitting there, and the whole time he was just sitting there and just looked pissed off. And I started creating
Mm.
this story in my head that I was wasting his time. And it was based on an experience. I had had a conversation with him the day before, and he was sharing with me he had a $1 million sales quota per day. And I'm thinking, I'm
Wow.
taking an hour of his time to talk about values. This dude already has this figured out. Like, this is not working. And I push through it, and we get to the end, and we're doing some sharing out. And to my surprise, he raises his hand. I prepare myself for whatever criticism is coming next. And he said, this exercise was interesting. that's not where I thought this was going to go, but all right, keep going. He said, initially it was pretty straightforward. Like my core values were excellence, hard work, customer service, integrity. And then as I was reflecting on the
Mm,
questions, I realized something. You know, I've been successful in my professional career and failed as a father and a husband. Customer service
mm,
is not just the people I serve in the business world, but my family too. And he said,
mm.
I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm leaving here committing to make a difference. And that's when I was rocked to the core and realized that Payne, stop judging yourself, that you think this is so simple that everybody has it figured out and you were the last to the party. In fact, I think we miss that first basic step because we want to overcomplicate things. And you start at values. And if you can start there in any relationship and understand what's important to someone, you can build a
Yeah.
team of the most diverse people when you start at a common place of understanding values and why they're important.
Team, I want to take a quick break from this episode and personally invite you to join our tribe. Are you looking for a community of leaders? If you are a leader at any level, join our Purposeful Accountable Leaders private Facebook or LinkedIn group. We would love to have you in the team. My mission is to create a community that allows leaders to ask questions, celebrate wins, and share lessons learned. All I ask is that you follow the B rule. Be respectful, be humble, be present, and add value to the community. You can find the link in the show notes to either join the Facebook or LinkedIn group, or simply just search Purposeful Accountable Leaders. Back to the podcast. That's the beauty about the Army, is that I spend so much time truly kind of just sitting down, reflecting and writing. And please, use that. I've always been kind of a fan of, why wouldn't I share my wisdom with people? Because at the end of the day, my mission is to positively affect 1 million veterans and civilians in the next 10 years. I'm trying to build a world of more transformational leaders. And if I can, reach one person, if I could help you with something so you could reach more people, at the end of the day, I'm getting it. But you're so true, is that I think to lead yourself well, and then to lead others well, one, it just starts with you. That's the first phase in my eyes of leadership, is it's self
Yep.
leadership. And in order to lead yourself well, you have to crack the nut up here of who you are, knowing that you're going to grow, because who I am right now, in 10 years, I will be someone
Mhm.
else. But you have to at least understand, what are your kind of core
Yeah.
values. And I'd love to maybe answer or ask you what the base of your leadership foundation. So going through college and going into being an accountant and then transitioning into Maxwell leadership, what was the one common thread that correlated to all three of those?
Relationships, just
I love it. Yeah.
people. Uh, I I can be egotistical, and in my 20s, absolutely, I had a chip on my shoulder. Probably still working through some of that growing up in, and don't get it twisted. My brother was an incredible leader and was the right person to have the skills and abilities because he was so humble. Like
Mm.
he was the first to shy away, point to his teammates. I would have been the guy on TV talking about, yeah, look at me. So I think there was
Yeah.
the higher power involved there, but recognizing there is a major low lid to the what you can do. And that's why I love your mission of touching a million lives. I'm sure you've seen Admiral McCraven's commencement speech to the University of Texas, where he
Yeah.
says, if each of you can touch 10 lives, have an impact in 10 lives, I think it's like 3 or 4 generations, we can change the world. I mean, that's all it takes.
Yeah.
You do your 10 in your lifetime, and we will change the world. We can turn it around. We can stop having some of the divisiveness that we have today if we just stopped and listened instead of trying to push our
Mm.
agenda or our point. Let me understand. And so I think the
That's
relationships is
the
that common thread.
that's beautiful, man. What I think there's a quote by John Maxwell is that people quit people, they don't quit
100%.
organizations. And so I started all of this, right? Like leadership and all of those things with one basic goal. How can I prevent soldiers from committing suicide? And it started from I've lost too many friends, too many soldiers, and I really reflected on how can I do that? What God given strengths, because they are God given, right? It's not something that I've just naturally learned, can I use to help build influence and achieve that? And when I discovered that, it was almost like a spiritual moment. Like I got emotional about it because I understood there's one common thread throughout my entire life that I've ever had, and it's been in leadership roles and being very successful. As a company commander, I ended up winning a very prestigious award, the General Douglas MacArthur Leadership Award, and that was a huge achievement. But in my mind, I didn't deserve it because I lost soldiers to some completely preventable circumstances. So I did not believe that I should have won that award. And continue fast forward, and I started thinking, okay, what strengths do I have, and how can I help prevent poor leaders? If I can prevent poor leaders, then I can help save someone's life, because it all starts back with, why do people usually get out of the army? It's not because they've had a great leader and they decide to get out one day. It's usually because they've had one poor leader throughout their entire career, and that one poor leader has left such a bad taste in their mouth that they decide to get out. But what I've learned is that people who choose the path, and we were talking about that before we got on, a tale of two cities. You can be a transitional leader or a
Mm.
transformational leader. A lot of people that walk down that path of transitional leadership chose that path because they didn't know any better. They didn't know that, you have to lead the whole person, kind of going back to what that guy discovered. You have to understand that you have to have a work family self balance. You have to determine what pillars are most important in your life, and talking about the core values, and who are you? How are you going to show up every day? How are you going to shine a spotlight, lead with charisma, enthusiasm, all of those things? And I'm going to shut up because you're supposed to be the guest, and I'm doing
I
all the
love
talking.
it. I got to ask you another question based on what you just said there. You made a great point. You got to do the work, and I think the problem is we're not setting young leaders up with what it looks like to do the work and encouraging them and helping them do the work because no other reason, doing a lot of work in this generational space. And Tim Elmore just wrote a book, Generational Diversity, and I love it because he's done the research as to, why are people the way they are based on the generation they grew up in. And so you've got a generation, let's use the baby boomers right now, there's a big portion of them in leadership and transitioning out. They grew up underneath the um, I don't even remember the generation before them, but whatever.
It's the greatest generation.
Exactly, the greatest generation that
Yeah.
went through the depression, and so these boomers, they
Yeah.
they didn't ask questions, they didn't chant, they just knew if they sat there long enough and did head down. I literally was having this conversation just the other day. When I started in the banking world, I put my head down. I knew someday I would look up and I'd be in leadership, so we have a lot of people that are there, and we now have a new generation that is not a head down leadership. We have this young generation has had these cell phones their entire life, and they have every answer to the questions they need. They can find it right here. The challenge is they can't
Yeah.
apply it. And so where this generation of boomers can really add value is helping take that experience, the depth and breadth of experience they have, and connecting it and helping them, these younger generations, get a frame of reference for the information they have. But there's such a disconnect in the way that they've always done it and what's worked for them and this new generation. I mean, it just is what it is, and so
Yeah.
we've got to build those bridges. All that context to be said, in order to do the work, we have to recognize where our strengths was. That's what you said. You said, I knew, where can I help? Where are my strengths? So my question to you is, when did you become consciously aware of where your natural giftingness are?
So I think there's a couple ways of doing that. The first one is just really thinking about it. So that's where I just sat down and I mapped out what do I think my strengths are. And the Army has a bunch of really useful tools. They have the 360 assessment of where your peers and your subordinates and your bosses can assess you. And then they, what are those called? KSAs, I can't think of what KSA stand for.
Key
Key knowledge
key
points
strength
or,
areas, skill
yeah, I think
areas.
so. And they identified those. So I took it a little bit deeper. And when I was in company command, I actually have the book back there on the wall. Now Discover Your Strengths by Gallup Strength Finder poll. I took that assessment and I learned, okay, I'm competitive, I'm focused, I'm empathetic, and all of these things. I did not truly discover what my strengths were until I was placed outside of my comfort zone. So I left the infantry and I went into Army acquisitions for two reasons. One, and I'll never forget this, is that I was doing a 12-mile ruck march with one of my soldiers and it was EIB, and my back and my knee just locked up on me. And I'm sitting there and I'm seeing all these soldiers pass me, and it's almost like an emotional event is that I can't do this anymore. Like physically, I cannot ask my soldiers to do something I can't do, but I still love serving. What else can I do? And I found acquisitions. Okay. Second reason is I wanted to try something new. I joined acquisitions. I go get my naval postgraduate school degree. And while I'm going through all that, I'm getting challenged every single day of new areas that I have no idea what I'm doing. So, what's my fallback plan? What's my retrograde plan? My retrograde plan is what are my strengths and how can I leverage them to succeed in this new operational environment? So, I would tell you that I didn't discover my strengths until probably about 34, 35. And I don't think anyone can discover their strengths. You can read any book, you can take any test that you want, but until you put yourself in an environment that challenges you and you have to fall back on what you think your strengths are, you're never going to understand what they
Oh,
are. Uh,
I
but
love that.
I asked the same question to
Yeah,
you.
no, I love that, and I wrote that down because it's that comfort zone. So interesting. So I've got this fascination with strengths because again, it's so funny that talking about this is why I love doing this, because it just brings more clarity to me. Seeing for so much of my early life, I was so worried about my strengths had to be whatever other people thought they were, or whatever they wanted. I didn't do the work to say, look, you don't have to be like your brother, you don't have to be like this guy, like you are who you are, you're gifted. And it's like so simple, isn't it? It's like, duh. It's the accounting class. Payne, look up and you'll see that there's something different here. But again, learn everything the hard way. And so I'll be honest, I'm still on the journey. I know relationships is one of them for sure. I just love people. Intuition. I've got a strong intuition, and I'm a decent communicator. What's interesting is I went through a period being in accounting. There's no communication, and so my communication skills got worse, actually significantly worse, because it's like a muscle. You don't use them, you lose them. And I spent so much time focused on my weaknesses. That's why I asked the question. I'm like, it'd be interested to know with the Army, like, are they good at helping you explore and identify them? Because where I spend the majority of my work within organizational health and with people is, do you know what your strengths are? Like, what are your giftedness? And get in as much alignment and congruence with those skill sets in your professional life, because if you can do that, you will be hyperly successful. But in the organizations I've been a part of and the teams that I've helped, some do it better than others. We tend to focus on the weaknesses, at least in my experience, and we don't take the individual into consideration. So here's their skill sets, and they can be valuable in any seat, whether it's a C-level executive or a low level. We can have a tenacious, detail-oriented C-level executive that's not strategic, but they can be successful depending on who they surround themselves with. And we can have a not very detail oriented creative thinker that can be successful in public accounting, but we have to customize it, right? And we have to help them find it. But you're 100% correct. I think it's the comfort zone that really refines those skills. And so when I stepped out of the professional, the corporate world 2 years ago, I've been very fortunate to have the success that I've had. That was the comfort zone. I had stepped out, and even though I'd been in a couple of different companies over the previous decade or so, I had done largely the same things, and I was in positions where I was creating the role for the first time. So I, again, always defaulted to my natural tendencies. So I would do the things that I was comfortable with, and I couldn't really identify the true strengths until I got outside of that comfort zone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that no, that's beautiful. And so I think the Army does do a relatively good job of kind of helping mature and foster those strengths. But another thing that I would always kind of challenge people with is if you're naturally weak in an area of being, let's say like in engineering field, you have to be extremely detail oriented. If you're not detail oriented and you kind of go in that path, you're only going to be able to rise to a certain level. And if you take a leadership role doing that, the people around you are only going to rise to the level that you're at. And what I've learned, and I think I read this in John Maxwell's book of 5 levels of leadership too, talking about like Olympic athletes. When an Olympic athlete starts their path to become great at that one thing, they already have a natural ability to be better than other people around them. Like I know that I suck at mathematics, right? Like I can do it. Trust me. As much time and effort that I put into being good at math, I can only ever become average at being math, but I can never be exceptional. And he always talks about what separates ordinary from extraordinary. I think what separates ordinary from extraordinary is developing your weaknesses, you'll become ordinary. Developing your strengths, you'll become
Mm,
extraordinary. And then when you do that, others will rise to your leadership. And then that's where you start creating that funnel of phase 4 leaders, phase 5 leaders. And if you want to create a team that can weather any storm, you have to create alignment with your
yeah.
strengths. But then you also need to figure out ways to pull strengths out from other people and then change that mindset, because it's so hard. I don't know what it in the civilian world, but I'd love to get your perspective on this. Is that we always want to focus on areas that we're weak at, even in school. Like, all right, well, your history grades are kind of lacking, but you're really good at math. So let's spend an extra 30 minutes a day on history so you can learn when whatever was
Yeah.
written, which you'll never learn. Or you could have spent that 30 minutes to foster your math, and maybe you could have got a scholarship to go to school for free and then go get a STEM degree that makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
Yes.
And how do you see that in the civilian world?
I'll answer that. I want to push back on one thing you said, and just to see kind of where you land on it. So you said if you're not detail oriented, you're probably not going to make a good engineer. There's truth. I think there's a certain level of competency we need. So I'll use my
Hmm.
accounting degree. I mean, I was able to be successful in accounting. I mean, got my CPA license. Was won the Employee of the Year award right before. I mean, so was able to
That's
do
awesome.
the things. But what I believe true leadership is to recognize where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, and in every
Yeah.
area, your strengths can shine. So if I was to go back and do it all over again and go into public accounting, I would have worked for 1 or 2 years, and then I would have created a position and pitched it to the partners of a salesman, of being a public accounting salesman. unheard of in the industry. But I believe that type of person, it would have took, you had to build, again, talk about leadership and influence, had to be trusted, had to be
Mm,
respected, had to make sure it was a win-win, because it would have been a hard sell to some of the accountants. I would have had to make sure I set myself up for success and played the long game. But that is an area I could have excelled in over time, because I love meeting people. I love to connect the dots. And it's not, I'm not the genius. I'll build the trust and connect you with the guy, the Michael Jordan of
I
accounting.
love that.
And so, but if
Yeah.
I didn't have that awareness at that point, having that awareness now, like the first two, my inner circle as a solo entrepreneur, like I do a lot of things myself, delegate as much as I can outside of my strengths. But when I'm creating a new program, very creative. I love brainstorming, collaborating, creating ways to help people learn and develop and grow, right? And so when I've got an idea kind of fleshed out to a decent amount, I go to two people. I go to my buddy Orlando, who's a PhD from Yale, very systematic, logical thinker, or I go to my buddy Edwin, who PharmD, very, again, same type of guy, but both Maxwell team members, but both in the leadership space. And I say, I learned this the hard way. First, I would say, hey, let's get a call. I want to ask you something. Well, now I've sent them a week beforehand. I'll send them an email with, here's my plan. Here's what I have thinking. Spend a week talking, thinking about it, and then let's talk. And they'll come and they'll bring 20 reasons as to why it's not going to work or where it's going to fail.
Mm,
5 years ago, I would have taken that as defeat and be like, oh my gosh, like I don't want these people around me, because they're not going to help. But now it's like, no, those people make me better, because then I take those 20, prioritize the five that are going to sink my ship, get those handled, and deal with the rest of the 15 like icebergs, and navigate that ship as we roll it out. But I would never
mm.
be able to see around those corners like these two guys do. So
So that's a beautiful awareness,
yeah,
man. And I want to jump in there because you said something that is very powerful. That your strengths aren't naturally other people's strengths. We all have these in the military. I call it dead
yeah,
space. It's terrain that we can't see through. It's too thick. It's too dense, and that's where the enemy likes to
mhm,
operate. That's invisible to us, but it's obvious to other
yep.
people. And when you can surround yourself and tap into everyone's strength as a collective whole, well, now you're creating the shield wall that can defend from any angle, and then that's powerful.
Yeah,
You aligned your weaknesses with others' strengths to kind of help break through that and tap back into your
yeah.
strengths.
And as a society, we've just done a bad job of recognizing we can't be all things to everybody. We just can't.
Yeah.
And so we've got to celebrate our strengths and celebrate the people that have strengths that are different than us. And that's exactly what you talked about. And instead of doing that and that's one of the things that I try to really push when I with my clients is like, look, you're not going to be everything to all people, and you were not
Yeah.
gifted to do it all. And so let's celebrate what you are good at, align it, and let's build a team around you, knowing that there's going to be major gaps between
Mm.
just characteristics, personality traits between those two people. Orlando and Edwin are introverts, and so on the surface, without me knowing it, I can talk to them and think they're judging me, but really all they're doing is processing what I'm saying. Instead of me thinking they're judging me and keep word vomiting, I need to stop and let them process, right? Something I had to learn the hard way. But recognizing, hey, there's the gap that we have to build. And if we can bridge that and raise that awareness, we can do exactly what you just said. You talk about those dead spots. I mean, that's where people in your field die. If your blind spot is not covered by somebody else, that's where you're vulnerable. And so if you can build a team that has strengths in every area so that you come through, and a leader that recognizes it's not about me, I'm a self-aware leader. If the hill is something that we need to take and it's in my strength zone, I'm going to lead that every time. But if it's not in my strength zone and it's in this guy's strength zone, let him lead it and I'll follow, right? Elevate them so that they can succeed, and really hone in on their gifts. And that's how you make some real magic happen.
That's beautiful, brother. So I kind of like to transition now. Where are you at currently on your leadership journey, and where do you want to be? 5 to 10 years now. What kind of impact do you want to have?
Yeah, I love, your million leader mandate, as Maxwell would call it. I just love that impact. For me, it's trying to help as many people as I can get in that strength zone, because you talk
Mm,
about the issues that we have right now, and workforce shortage in the public sector. I'm sure in the military you're probably having issues as well. Budget issues, demands on leaders to do more with less. And what an awesome time to be in leadership development, and what an awesome time to have a skill to help people identify that. So that's really where I spend the most of my time, is understanding, helping people not have to take over a decade of the journey that I had to go on. And I mean, you talk about depression. That's what happens when you spend a elongated periods of time focusing on weaknesses. Because what I found was I can put as much effort, energy, and time into developing my weaknesses, as and watch my colleagues in public accounting excel at a much quicker pace. And when I was in that, I was like, what is wrong with me? Nothing was wrong with me. I was in the wrong seat on the bus. And if I just got on a different seat and had that awareness earlier, I mean, I could, again, I'm grateful for everything I've had. I wouldn't be where I am today, but I could, my goal is to accelerate that, so that you've got people with longer runways that are in the right seat. They're not banging their head against the wall. And then you're really lifting teams up. But with that, recognizing not everybody, when you get diversity on a team, a real diversity, you talk about generational diversity and all the kinds of diversity, there are potential for major problems because there's just
yeah.
differences. But at that, going back to what we talked about earlier, if you can find that common ground at the beginning, oftentimes I like to start with values. Everything can build from there. So that's where I am on my journey. And I think I don't know if you didn't ask this, but the biggest growth for me, when I started my company, it was, the limiting beliefs of who am I to be able to do the work that I get to do, like not
Mm,
feeling adequate enough. And so from the beginning, there were things that I would do, would self sabotage, just to manifest that belief of, Payne, you can't do this. Like, who are you to be working with, billion-dollar sales leaders? And over the last couple of years, I've really grown in that space, and now it's taking it to the next level of, okay, you can do this, you need to do this. Now get professional and really hone that craft, so that you can have the biggest impact as fast as possible, so you can set as many teams up, to kind of be ahead of the race.
that's beautiful. Yeah, and you stole my thunder because I was going to ask that question. Like, how did you grow over the years? So you must have picked my brain. It's time for our final show segment that I like to call the Killer Bees. These are the same 4 questions that I ask every guest on the Tales of Leadership podcast. Be brief, be brilliant, be present, and be gone. Question 1. What do you believe separates an average leader from an extraordinary leader?
I would say intent and or purpose and alignment of strengths. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about just getting in that sweet spot.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, question 2. What is one resource that you could recommend to our listeners?
My mind. I'll give you where my mind went first. I'm gonna two. They get a bonus one. A book, Go Giver by Bob Berg. Um, it's a short one, so it's probably one of the reasons I liked it. But just the power of doing the right thing, no matter what, and always having that giving mindset. Still got a long way to go on that, not looking at myself and being self-centered, but the power of doing and giving and how that comes back. And two, I think it's reflection, man. One of the things I didn't do early enough was reflection, and it was probably because I was scared of what I was going to find. But one of the things I did when I started my business 2 years ago, I started answering three questions every day. What went well? It started off, what would I
Mm.
change, or what didn't go well. It started off, what didn't go well, but then I changed it to, what would I change, or what would I do differently. I needed that kind of the pivot, just that alteration, not the negative connotation. And then, where did God show up? Again, man of faith. And so I've been doing that for over 18 months, and that's doing that on a daily basis. There's a quote, we often underestimate what we can do in a year and overestimate what we can do in a day, right? And that has been the foundation to my year-end reflection process of going through and saying, look at the growth, man, and look at what happened. So those are the two. Bob Berg, Go Giver, and just find some questions that you can consistently answer on a daily basis. And it's evolved because it started with a 5 or 6 questions. I'm like, that's just too many. Let's do three.
So I love that. And the military has a framework for what you just said. It's called AAR, after action review. What were we supposed to do? What did we do? And how can we
Yeah.
improve next
And that
time?
very well might be what sparked it. I think I was listening to a podcast. I'm like, you know what? It's time.
I love that. All right. So, third question is, if you had the opportunity to go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Stop looking externally and start looking internally. I was so caught up with, again, it was popularity, but it was popularity because I wanted to feel wanted, and not understanding, like, A, I couldn't do it with everybody, but B, when I was my authentic self, I was so loved and so accepted, but I never thought that was good enough. So look internal, not external.
Well, all right. So, the last question is, how can our listeners find you and how can they add value to you?
I think they can find me. You can throw my email up in the show notes. It's Payne at Payne Schoen Consulting. I'll give it to you. You don't have to spell it. I've got a website, and what's been cool is cool. Some of the growth is, website's okay. It's under construction as we speak, but it was one of those undercutting things. I didn't spend any time on it because I just had a hard time articulating, A, what I could do, and B, like, putting myself out there. So been working now to professionalize that, and hopefully in the next month or so that'll come out. And so the website, the email, I'm on social a little bit, but this is how I connect. This is how I've built my business. So just email me. Love to talk. If something resonated and you want more, and there's a way that I can share and help, I would love that. How they can add value to me, I go back to continuing to develop themselves, because the better they are in their skin, the better leaders they are, the better team members they are, the ripple effect is going to continue. And so, I think that's the way that people can add the value to me, is develop themselves and be kind. Just be kind to everybody. It's a tough world right now.
It is, man. Yeah. So it's funny. Every time I film these podcast episodes, I always say, "Hey, this is my favorite one. This is my favorite one." Well, this is probably to date my favorite one that I've filmed. And thank you so much for taking that time, because I know it's during the holidays too. So it means a lot to me that you're intentional and you're able to talk leadership and help me extend my influence to ultimately help achieve my
Yeah.
mission. So thank you.
You're welcome, man. I loved being a part of it. Thank you. I've got a page worth of notes here that you've challenged me, you've given me, you've added value to me. So I'm excited to continue our friendship, and just to watch the impact that you've had, because your mission and your why behind helping soldiers transition, and you and I had this conversation when we first talked, I think is so important. And it's kind of like when I left sports, there was a void in my life, and it pales in comparison to the military, but there was this void, and I just had to figure it out, and there was nobody that can really resonate, and I was no longer in an environment where I was around athletes. And so, like, I can only imagine, you think of soldiers, they go, and yeah, they've got their buddies, but if you go from being just immersed in that environment to welcome to civilization. Are you kidding
Yeah.
me? And again, I know the Army and services are working on that, but you have a gift that can bridge that. And man, I am just super excited to see the impact of it. So thank you, brother, for what you're doing.
All right, team. That was our interview with Payne. So, what are the top 3 takeaways that you should have? The first one that I pulled out was his definition of leadership. And I've had several people on this podcast so far that's really talked about influence, but he said something that is so beautiful in a way because it's true. And it was one of my first fears of when I heard what influence was. It's manipulation versus inspiration, and how he talked about influence as being an inspiration versus manipulation. So you can use influence for either good or bad. Like Mark Twain, A Tale of Two Cities. At the end of the day, when I talk about transitional leadership or transformational leadership, how you choose to wield influence, at the end of the day, it's just a tool. It's how you build relationships with people. It's how you begin to inspire. And I'll read you the Army's definition of leadership. I've read it before. I'm probably going to use it again, but ADRP 6 22 defines leadership as influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to complete the mission and improve the organization. That's the goal. That is what influence is. Provide purpose, direction, and motivation to complete the mission and improve the organization. The second key takeaway that I had here is life is chaotic. If you ever read the book 12 Rules of Life for Jordan Peterson, he talks about the two, chaos and order, the difference between chaos and order. And we're always striving that. And in life, life is chaotic, leadership is chaotic, and we're going to be put into situations that is going to bring chaos out. But how can you bring order into those environments? And I talked about doing a SEALs halt. So stopping, taking a knee, taking off your eye pro, taking off your gloves, all of those things, taking off the equipment that affects your lens in a new operational environment, how you see the world, and just listening and then reflecting on it and getting acclimated to that new operational space and then moving out. Life will continue. But when you're put into new stressful situations, you have to take the time up front to have a tactical pause. You have to orient yourself in that environment before you begin to move out. Because if you don't orient yourself correctly, that's where you're not going to have true alignment in your life. The final key takeaway that I have is finding your strengths. And he talks about it beautifully is that you can develop your weaknesses. And even if you develop your weaknesses to the point you're only ever going to be ordinary or average, the difference between an ordinary and extraordinary leader is their abilities to spend time on the things that is going to have truly the most impact. So the Pareto principle, I've shared this before previously, states that 80% of our results come from 20% of our time spent on the things that produce 80% of the results. So think of it this way, is that your strengths, your top 5 strengths are going to produce 80% of the results that you're going to see in life. If you can spend the time fostering those strengths, you're naturally going to see better results, better growth in your life. And if you surround yourself with individuals on your team that is also fostering and building their strengths, that last 20% is going to be easily covered. And that's the goal. The goal is finding your strengths, but developing them, and then also finding your team strengths and developing them, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is build a shield wall that protects everyone within the organization from outside threats. We talked about, if you don't discover your strengths and you only focus on your weaknesses, you're going to be operating in dead space. This is terrain that creates tunnel vision, and there's going to be naturally blind spots that are invisible to you visible to the enemy and visible to other people in your team. The only way to overcome those is to bring people in your team that have different strengths than you and make sure that they're covering your six, they're covering your blind spot. Hey, if you got any value from today's episode, do me a favor. Leave a comment, leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on. But most importantly, and it would mean the world to me, is if you shared this podcast, share it with someone who is a leader, someone who is just starting out on their leadership journey. As always, I'm your host, Josh McMillian, saying every day is a gift. Don't waste yours. I'll see you next time.